Before we begin, I need you to stop what you are doing, not slow down. Stop. Put your hand on your chest. Feel that rhythmic thud underneath your ribs. That is the sound of borrowed time. That is the metronome of a life that is moving, whether you are ready or not. Every beat is a second spent. Every second spent is a second that will never, under any law of the universe, come back to you. Now I want you to think about something, and I want you to be honest, because no one is listening except you and the walls and whatever version of yourself has been whispering to you at 3 in the morning for the last several months, maybe years. What are you waiting for? No, really. What specific thing, what specific moment, what specific version of your circumstances are you waiting to arrive before you finally begin? There is a man I want to tell you about before we go any further into this book. His name was David, and he lived in a city that smelled of rain and diesel fuel, in a third-floor apartment with a window that faced a brick wall. David was 34 years old. He had a notebook on his desk. It was a beautiful notebook, thick-paged, with a dark green cover, and his initials embossed in the corner, because someone had given it to him as a gift, with the words, "For all the great things you are going to write." That notebook sat on his desk for 6 years. 6 years, untouched, the pages still white and waiting, still carrying that particular smell of anticipation that new paper has. Every morning David would sit down at that desk, open his laptop, do whatever urgent thing the day demanded of him, and then look at that notebook for about 40 seconds before standing up and making coffee instead. He had a story inside him. He had always had a story inside him. He could feel it the way you can sometimes feel a song on the tip of your tongue that you cannot quite name. He was going to write it when things settled down, when work was less crazy, when he had saved enough money to take a sabbatical, when his relationship was in a better place, when he felt more confident, when he had more time, when he was more ready. He died on a Tuesday afternoon in March from a blood clot that reached his brain in under 4 minutes. He was 34 years old. The notebook was buried with him, still empty. I am not telling you this story to frighten you. I am telling you this story because inside the fact of David's empty notebook lives the central terror and the central truth of this entire book. Because David was not lazy, David was not untalented, David was not even uncommitted in the traditional sense of the word. David was doing something that most of us are doing right now, today, in this very moment of your life. David was waiting for one day, and one day never comes. This book is about what happens when you stop waiting for one day and make today day one instead. Those two phrases look almost identical. One day, day one. Rearrange the same 3 words and you rearrange your entire life. That is not a metaphor. That is not a motivational slogan stitched onto a pillow. That is a literal description of what happens inside human lives when people make the switch from one orientation to the other. One day is passive. One day is future tense living. One day means you are always standing at a threshold, waiting for the door to open by itself, when you are holding the handle in your own hand. Day one is an act. Day one is the morning of something new. Day one means you walk through the door today, even if your palms are sweating and your legs are shaking and you are absolutely, completely uncertain about what is on the other side. What follows in these pages is not a collection of advice you already know but haven't followed. This is not another book of motivational quotes dressed up in chapters. This is something else entirely. This is a deep, slow, honest reckoning with why you are where you are, and a precise, unflinching map of how to become where you want to be. There are 14 chapters in this book. 14 because 14 is how many distinct psychological thresholds stand between the life you are living right now and the life you are capable of living. Each chapter is a door. Some of them will be easy to walk through. Some of them will make you want to put this book down and go do something else. When that happens, when you feel that particular urge to escape, I want you to notice it. That feeling is not boredom. That feeling is recognition. That is the feeling of something true landing too close. We begin now, not on Monday, not after you finish your coffee. not when you're in a better headspace. Now, day 1 starts exactly here. Chapter 1. The archaeology of your own life. There is a moment in archaeology when a team has been digging for weeks and found nothing but dirt and stones, and then one of them drives a tool into the earth, and it hits something hollow. That sound, that particular resonant ring of metal striking buried space, changes everything in the excavation. The whole crew knows something is about to be revealed. You are about to make that sound. Most people never do a real accounting of their own life. Not a surface-level reflection, not the half-hearted journaling that happens for 3 days in January before the notebook joins every other abandoned notebook in the drawer. I mean a genuine archaeological dig into the soil of your own story, all the way down to the stratum where the foundational decisions were made, where the original narratives were laid, where someone told you something about yourself or the world that you have been living inside ever since, without ever once questioning whether it was true. Let me ask you something. Who told you that you were not the kind of person who finishes things? Think carefully, because someone did. It might have been a parent who called you flaky. It might have been a teacher who said you had potential but not discipline. It might have been an early failure, something you tried and abandoned or tried and failed at, that you converted into a story about your own nature. It might have been a culture, a neighborhood, a socioeconomic circumstance that showed you what kind of people succeed and made clear that you were a different kind. That story is running right now, underneath everything you do. It is in the background of every ambitious plan you have started and not finished. Every goal you have set and quietly lowered, every dream you have described to someone and immediately followed with a laugh and the words, "But that's probably not realistic." You call it being practical, you call it being a realist. What it actually is obedience. You are obeying a story you did not write. This is where the archaeology begins. Not with tactics and strategies and morning routines and productivity hacks. It begins in the dirt, with the question of who taught you to live a small life and whether you are going to keep taking their word for it. I want to introduce you to a concept that I am going to call your origin narrative. Every human being has one. Your origin narrative is the story you tell yourself, usually below the level of conscious thought, about who you are, what you are capable of, what you deserve, and what is possible for someone like you. The reason this matters is that your origin narrative operates like a governor on an engine. You know what a governor is. On certain vehicles and machines, a governor is a device that artificially limits the top speed. The engine is capable of going faster. The engine has the horsepower to go faster. But the governor steps in and says, "No, we cap out here." You have a governor installed in your psychological engine. You probably had it installed before you were old enough to know it was being fitted. Here is the question that the first chapter of this book is asking you to sit with. Not answer immediately. Sit with. What would your life look like if you removed the governor? Not what would it look like in some far-fetched fantasy. Not if you had infinite money or infinite talent or infinite time. What would your life look like if the only thing that changed was that you no longer believed the story, that you are not the kind of person who accomplishes extraordinary things? Take that question seriously. Let it have room. Most people, when they first encounter it, immediately deflect into practicalities. They start listing obstacles. They start naming all the reasons why that question does not apply to them specifically. They say, "But you don't understand my situation." And I want to acknowledge that every situation has real constraints. I am not dismissing the weight of circumstance. What I am asking you to notice is how quickly you move to list the constraints, rather than sit with the possibility. That speed, that eagerness to close the door on the question, that is your governor activating. Now let us go deeper. There is a woman I know, I will call her Miriam, who grew up in a household where money was perpetually almost there, not absent, not devastating, but always almost. Her parents worked constantly and worried constantly, and the ambient noise of her childhood was the low-frequency hum of financial anxiety. As a child, Miriam absorbed something. She could not have named it if you asked her. But she absorbed the idea that wanting too much was dangerous, that reaching too high was how you got disappointed, that the smart move was to keep your expectations realistic and your ambitions modest. Miriam is 41 years old. She is brilliant. Every person who knows her says so. She has an idea for a company that her industry colleagues, the 3 people she has confided in over the last 9 years, have called genuinely innovative. She has notebooks, several of them, filled with detailed planning documents, market analyses, customer personas, financial projections. She has never started the company. When I asked Miriam why, she did not initially say fear. She gave me practical reasons. She said the market was not quite right. She said she needed more capital. She said she was waiting until her kids were older. All of these things were true, in the way that most convenient truths are true. They were real factors. They were also not the real reason. The real reason lived in the childhood home with the almost there money and the always worried parents. The real reason was a 6-year-old girl who learned that safety lived in the middle, not the top. The real reason was an origin narrative that said, people like us do not swing for the fences, and if we do, we lose everything. Miriam had been obeying that story for 35 years. And the remarkable thing, the heartbreaking and simultaneously hopeful thing, is that she did not even know she was obeying it. She thought she was being sensible. This is what origin narratives do. They do not announce themselves, they disguise themselves as wisdom. They dress up in the clothes of practicality and caution and common sense, and they whisper to you in the voice of your own most trusted inner advisor, and you listen to them the way you would listen to someone who loves you, because in a strange way they were installed by people who did love you, or who at least were doing what they knew to do. But here is the thing about the people who installed your governor. They were not you. They were not living your life. They were living their lives filtered through their own limitations, their own fears, their own unexamined origin narratives that were installed in them by people who were also doing what they knew to do. The chain goes back and back and back, generation after generation of people passing down the ceiling of what was considered possible, and every generation accepting it as the truth instead of recognizing it as a hand-me-down limitation. You have the option to be the generation that stops accepting it, but you cannot stop accepting something you cannot see. So here is the first real exercise of this book. Not a worksheet, not a 5-step framework, something more like surgery. I want you to write down 3 things you have wanted to do or become or create in your life that you have not yet pursued, or that you have pursued half-heartedly, or that you have started and abandoned. 3 things that live in that notebook, 3 things that are still waiting. Now, for each one, I want you to write down the real reason you have not done it. Not the practical reason, not the time or money or circumstance reason, the real reason, the one that lives below the practical reason, the one that only appears in that private interior voice at 3 in the morning. If you do not know the real reason yet, if you cannot immediately access it, that is fine. Sit with the question. The answer will come, and when it does, it will probably not feel like an insight. It will feel more like a quiet recognition, like remembering something you always knew. That recognition is the sound of your shovel hitting something hollow. That is the archaeology beginning. Here is what I want you to know as we stand at the beginning of this book, at the beginning of this excavation. The fact that you have an origin narrative that is limiting you is not a flaw. It is not a pathology. It is not evidence that something is wrong with you. Every human being on earth who has ever done anything extraordinary had an origin narrative running that told them they could not. The difference was not that they were born without the governor. The difference was that they became conscious of it, and then they made a choice. The choice was not easy. It never is. But it was a choice, and that is the foundational truth of everything that follows in this book. You are not your origin narrative. You are the person who can choose to write a different story. You are not David with the empty notebook. You are the person who read about David and felt something tighten in your chest. because something in you recognized the danger of that ending, because something in you is determined to write something different. That something is called a life. And day one of it starts the moment you decide to stop waiting for one day. Go deeper now. This is where it gets harder and more important and more honest. Your origin narrative has allies. It does not operate alone. It has recruited over the years a supporting cast of beliefs, habits, relationships, and environments that all reinforce the same central story. This is what psychologists sometimes call confirmation bias, but it goes much further than the intellectual preference for information that agrees with what you already believe. It is an entire architecture of daily life, constructed around the preservation of a particular self-concept. Think about the people you spend most of your time with, not the people you admire from a distance, the people in your actual daily orbit, the people you eat with and talk to and text when something happens. Are those people living at the level you want to reach? Are they challenging you in the gentle and relentless way that real growth requires? Or are they comfortable companions in a shared mediocrity, people who love you genuinely, but who also, knowingly or not, benefit from your not outgrowing the dynamic you share? This is a dangerous question to ask because the honest answer can feel like a betrayal of people you love. I am not telling you to abandon anyone. I am asking you to see clearly, because the social environment is not the backdrop of your growth. It is one of the primary architects of it. There is a concept in biology called the metabolic theory of ecology, which describes how organisms are shaped by their environment at the most fundamental level, not just in behavior but in the actual structure of their bodies and the capacity of their cells. Human beings are not so different. The environments we inhabit, physical, social, psychological, shape us at a level far deeper than we typically acknowledge. Your origin narrative is living in your environment as much as it lives in your mind. The first chapter of this book ends here, not because we have finished the archaeology, but because you need time to dig. Real archaeology cannot be rushed. The layers have been compressing for years, sometimes decades, and they do not yield their secrets to impatience. But here is what you take with you from this chapter. The thing I want settled in your chest before we move to the next. You are not your history. You are not your circumstances. You are not the story someone else wrote for you in a childhood you did not choose. You are, at this moment, a human being in possession of the single most radical and underutilized power in the known universe, which is the power to decide what happens next. The archaeologist does not mourn the ruins. The archaeologist studies them, understands them, learns from them, and then uses what they know to build something new. The ruins are not your destination. They are your foundation. Now let us build. Chapter 2. The Anatomy of a Wasted Life. I want to be honest with you in this chapter. Uncomfortably honest. The kind of honest that might make you set this book down for a moment and stare at the ceiling. And that is fine, because the ceiling has nothing new to offer you, and when you come back, the truth will still be here, waiting with the patience that truth always has. There is a particular kind of wasted life that never gets talked about because it is not dramatic enough to be a cautionary tale. We talk about wasted lives in extremes: the addict who lost everything, the criminal whose choices destroyed them, the person who was struck by tragedy and never recovered. These stories carry weight and they deserve to be told, but they also give the rest of us a convenient alibi. We look at those stories and we think, well, at least that is not me. At least I have not wasted my life like that. And we return to our routine, reassured. But there is a wasted life that is entirely invisible because it is dressed in the costume of responsibility. It attends all its meetings and pays all its bills and mows its lawn on Saturdays and tells everyone it is fine. It is a life not ruined by catastrophe, but quietly consumed by the absence of ambition. It is a life where every important choice was made in the direction of safety, where every difficult thing was postponed, where every genuine desire was filed under someday. This is the wasted life that I want to talk about, because it is the most common one, and it is the most preventable. Let me describe a day. The alarm goes off. Before the eyes are fully open, before the first cup of coffee, before any deliberate thought has entered the mind, the phone is in the hand. The screen lights up with 17 notifications. Nothing urgent, nothing life-changing, just the continuous drip of the digital world pouring itself into consciousness like a slow-acting sedative. The morning, which used to be protected, which used to be the only part of the day that genuinely belonged to this person, is immediately colonized by other people's content, and other people's urgencies, and other people's timelines, and other people's performances of their own lives. The day that follows this morning is not a day this person chose. It is a day that happens to them. Work obligations that feel like they belong to someone else's vision. Social obligations that look like connection but feel like theater. Evening routines that are not routines at all but just the collapse of forward momentum into whatever requires the least effort, which is usually a screen, which is usually an algorithmically curated stream of content designed not to nourish but to addict, designed not to inspire but to make you forget. For just a few more minutes, that time is passing. Then sleep, then the alarm, then the phone. Are you uncomfortable yet? I hope you are. I want you to be, because that description contains something that should not be comfortable. That description is the anatomy of a day in which nothing of the person's deepest nature is expressed. Nothing they most care about is advanced. Nothing that will matter in 10 years is touched. It is a day that could be erased from the record of this person's life, and the final accounting would not look meaningfully different. Multiply that day by 365 and you have a year. Multiply that year by 10 and you have a decade. Multiply that decade by 4 and you have a life. That is not tragedy in the conventional sense. No one weeps at the funeral for a life like this. People say he was a good man, she was a kind woman. They worked hard and loved their family and never caused anyone any trouble. And all of that is true and all of it matters. But the private mourning, the mourning that happens in the moments before sleep when the mind is quiet enough to be honest, is for all the things that were real and never realized, for all the music that was never played, for all the books that were never written, for all the businesses that were never built, for all the conversations that were never had with the depth they deserved, for all the mornings that were surrendered before the day could even begin. The anatomy of a wasted life is not the story of a person who made terrible choices. It is the story of a person who made no choices at all. Let me introduce you to the concept of default living. Default living is what happens when you have not consciously constructed the life you want to be living, so instead you are living the life that your environment, your culture, your family history, and your own unexamined patterns have assembled for you by default. It is not a bad life necessarily. It may even by external metrics look like a successful life. But it is not your life. It is the life that happens to someone who has not yet decided to take authorship of their own story. You can tell if you are default living by asking yourself one question. If I took away all my obligations and social expectations and financial necessities for 1 year, and I was completely free to design my days according to nothing but what I genuinely believe matters most, would my life look anything like it does right now? For most people who are honest about this, the answer is no, not even close. That gap, the distance between the life you would choose and the life you are currently living, is the cost of default. It is not paid all at once. It is paid in small daily installments that feel negligible in the moment and devastating in the aggregate. Here is the thing about a wasted life that makes it uniquely difficult to address. It does not feel like a wasted life while it is happening. It feels like managing reality. It feels like being responsible. It feels like the necessary compromise between the idealistic self you once imagined being and the practical circumstances you actually inhabit. The mind is extraordinarily good at normalizing whatever circumstances it finds itself in. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation, and it is generally described as a feature, the psychological immune system that allows humans to bounce back from loss and tragedy and disappointment. But it is also a bug, because it adapts equally well to degraded circumstances. It adapts to shrinking. It adapts to the slow erosion of ambition and possibility. It adapts to that erosion so thoroughly that after enough time the person can no longer even feel what has been lost. The absence has been normalized. This is the most profound danger of waiting. Not that you will never get started, but that one day you will stop feeling the urgency to get started. One day the voice that calls to you from your unlived life will grow faint enough that you can genuinely mistake its silence for peace. That silence is not peace. That silence is the end of a dream so quiet it does not even sound like an ending. I want to talk about something that is rarely named in books like this because it makes people uncomfortable. I want to talk about the specific way that other people's approval governs the direction of our lives. Think about the last significant decision you made. Not which coffee to order, a real decision. A decision about your work, your relationships, your direction. When you made that decision, how much of it was determined by what you genuinely wanted versus what would be approved of by the people around you? Be honest. Most people, if they are honest, will admit that the calculation was not even close. The approval variable outweighs the genuine desire variable by an enormous margin. And this is not weakness or cowardice in the pejorative sense. It is ancient evolutionary circuitry doing exactly what it was designed to do. Human beings are tribal animals. The need for belonging, for acceptance, for the sense that our group will not cast us out, is not a superficial social preference. It is wired into the architecture of the brain at a level that predates language, that predates civilization, that goes all the way back to the era when being cast out of the tribe was not a metaphorical injury but a death sentence. We are running evolutionary software that is genuinely and profoundly mismatched to the circumstances of modern life. In the ancient environment, the person who deviated from the tribal consensus was in genuine danger. In the modern environment, the person who deviates from the consensus of their social group is in approximately zero physical danger and has access to a world of resources, communities, and opportunities that their ancestors could not have imagined. But the software does not know this. The software still fires the alarm when you consider doing something that might not be approved. The software still floods the system with fear and hesitation when you contemplate diverging from the expectations of the people around you. The software still interprets the social risk as existential risk, and so we shrink. Not out of genuine weakness, not because we are fundamentally timid, but because we are running an operating system that was built for a world that no longer exists. Understanding this does not automatically free you from it, but it changes the texture of the experience. When you feel that fear of disapproval, when you feel that hesitation before the unconventional choice, you can recognize it for what it is. You can say, this is ancient circuitry protecting me from a tribal exile that is not actually a threat. This fear is not signal. This fear is noise. And then you can choose anyway. That choice, choosing your genuine direction against the noise of social fear, is not a single dramatic moment. It is a daily practice. It is the practice of building, slowly and deliberately, the habit of authoring your own life rather than performing in someone else's vision of it. The anatomy of a wasted life is ultimately the anatomy of too much performance and too little genuine expression. It is the story of a person who spent so much time and energy maintaining the appearance that was expected of them that they never found out who they actually were, never found out what they were actually capable of, never found out what kind of mark their particular, irreplaceable presence in this world might have left if they had let themselves be fully, courageously, unapologetically themselves. The good news is this: you are reading these words. That means the story is not finished. That means the notebook is not yet buried. That means there is still time, and that time starts now, not on Monday, not next month, not when things settle down. Now. The moment you decide to stop being the passive recipient of a default life and become the active author of a chosen one is not a moment that requires preparation or ideal circumstances or the right level of readiness. It requires only a A genuine, irreversible, clear-eyed decision to stop playing it safe with your one life. That decision is the end of the anatomy lesson and the beginning of the surgery. Chapter 3, The Secret Chapter. I did not tell you about this chapter when I described the book. I said there were 14 chapters. I described the arc. But I did not mention this one because this one is not supposed to be mentioned. It is the chapter that lives between the other chapters, the negative space. The thing the book is really about underneath everything it says it is about. The secret chapter has no wisdom to impart. It has no framework, no model, no set of principles. It contains only one thing, a question. The question is this: what do you already know? Not what do you need to learn? Not what information are you missing? Not what skill are you lacking? What do you already know in the deep, wordless, bone-level way that certain truths are known before they are ever consciously articulated? Because here is the secret, the actual secret, that sits at the center of this book and at the center of every book ever written about human potential, and at the center of every conversation every great teacher has ever had with every searching student. You already know what you need to do. You already know, not all of it, not the full map. Not every step of the path, but the next step. The thing that needs to happen next in order for your life to begin moving in the direction it needs to move. You know it. You have known it, in most cases, for a long time. You have known it with the specific uncomfortable certainty of a thing that has not yet been acted on. It might be the conversation you need to have that you have been avoiding. It might be the decision you need to make that you have been postponing. It might be the morning you need to begin getting up earlier, the relationship you need to leave or the one you need to invest in more fully, the project you need to start, the thing you need to stop, the boundary you need to draw, the apology you need to give, the work you need to begin. You know what it is. The secret chapter is not here to tell you what to do. The secret chapter is here to remove the last excuse for not doing it. The excuse is that you do not know, but you do know. And now you have been caught knowing. The discomfort you may be feeling right now, that specific variety of discomfort that feels like being found out, is the feeling of the last alibi dissolving. It is the feeling of being out of excuses. It is the feeling of standing at the edge of the beginning, with nothing left to hide behind. This is the secret chapter, and it is the shortest chapter, and it is the most important one, because the question was never, what do you need to know? The question was always, what are you going to do with what you already know? That question is alive in you right now. It will still be alive tomorrow. The only variable is whether you are going to answer it with action, or whether you are going to add it to the long list of things you know and do not act on, that particular library of recognized truths that haunts the interior life of someone who is still waiting for one day. The secret chapter ends. Act. Chapter 4. The mathematics of small beginnings. There is a mathematical principle that changes everything once you genuinely understand it, not intellectually, not as a concept you can describe at a dinner party, but viscerally, in the gut, in the place where motivation actually lives. The principle is called compound interest, and you have almost certainly heard about it in a financial context. But I want to apply it to something far more important than money. I want to apply it to action. Here is how compound interest works in the simplest possible terms. If you put $1 in an account that doubles every day, at the end of 30 days you do not have $30. You have over $500 million. The math seems impossible until you do it. The first several days are laughably small. $1, $2, 4, 8, 16, nothing to show, nothing to celebrate, nothing that looks like it is going anywhere particularly remarkable. And then, quietly, without announcing itself, the doubling begins to matter. And then it begins to matter enormously. And then it begins to change the entire picture of what is possible. Your daily actions work exactly this way. Not immediately, not visibly, not in the first week or the first month or often the first year. The beginning of any meaningful endeavor is characterized by a period of apparent invisibility. You are working, you are building, you are accumulating, but the compound effect has not yet reached the threshold where it becomes perceptible to the naked eye. This is the period, this exact period of apparent invisibility that eliminates most people from the pursuit of anything genuinely significant. They stop. Not because they are lazy, not because they were never serious, but because they cannot see the effect of what they are doing, and the absence of visible evidence feels like the absence of progress. But the progress is happening. The compound is accumulating. The daily dollar is doubling. And when you stop, you do not merely halt the progress, you reset the compound. You go back to day one of the mathematical accumulation, and all the silent growth that had been happening underneath the surface, all the momentum that had been building in the invisible register, is gone. This is the tragedy of stopping. Not that you lose what you have built, you can always rebuild. The tragedy is that you lose the compound that was about to matter. You stop at day 23, when you are sitting at $800,000, having been unable to see through the apparent insignificance of the early days. And you walk away from what was, had you stayed, about to become 500 million. The mathematics of small beginnings is not about any single action being transformative. It is about the accumulation of non-transformative actions across time until they reach a threshold. And the threshold is always further out than it feels comfortable to keep going toward. Let me bring this into the practical, lived experience of a life being built. Think about the person who wants to get fit after years of neglect. They begin. The first day of the new routine is not impressive. They run a little, lift a little, eat a little better. Nothing changes in the mirror. Nothing changes in how they feel. The second day is the same. The fifth day is the same. The 30th day, if they make it there, still does not produce the dramatic visual transformation they are hoping for. But something has happened, something that cannot be seen in the mirror, but that is real at the cellular level, at the metabolic level, at the neurological level. Capillaries have grown, mitochondria have multiplied, neural pathways for the new behavior have thickened slightly. The body has made microscopic adaptations that are the silent precursors to visible change. The compound is building, and the person who stays with it, who continues past the point where it is exciting, past the point where it is comfortable, past the point where it feels like anything is happening, will one day wake up and look in the mirror and barely recognize what they see. Not because of a dramatic transformation, because of dozens of undramatic transformations happening at the rate of one per day over a long enough period that the math has finally become visible. This principle applies to every meaningful pursuit, every business, every skill, every relationship, every creative work, every intellectual development. All of them follow the same mathematical curve. All of them require the same willingness to work in the invisible zone, to trust the compound, to keep adding to the daily accumulation, even when nothing appears to be accumulating. Now let me tell you something about small beginnings that most books will not tell you. Small beginnings are not a concession, they are a technology. The instinct when you decide to change your life is to go big, to overhaul everything, to make sweeping declarations and dramatic gestures, to wake up on Monday with 17 new habits and a completely reconstructed daily schedule and a manifesto about who you are becoming. This instinct is completely understandable and almost always counterproductive. The research on behavior change is unambiguous on this point. Large, comprehensive changes to behavior collapse under their own weight. The cognitive and emotional resources required to sustain radical behavioral shifts across multiple domains simultaneously are greater than most humans can reliably sustain. The result is a brief period of exhilarating progress followed by an inevitable crash, followed by a return to default, followed by a kind of learned helplessness that makes the next attempt even harder because now there is history of failure layered on top. The small beginning, the genuinely small beginning, the almost embarrassingly small beginning, is not a compromise, it is a precision tool. Here is why. Behavior change at the neurological level is fundamentally about the formation of new neural pathways. A neural pathway does not form because you want it to, or because you decide you are going to think and act differently. It forms through repetition, through the repeated firing of the same sequence of neurons. The first time you do a new thing, a faint trace is laid in the neural substrate. The second time, the trace thickens slightly. The 100th time, it is a groove. The 1000th time, it is a highway that the brain travels automatically, without conscious effort. This is the neuroscience of habit, and the implication for starting is critical. A small action done consistently creates a deeper groove faster than a large action done irregularly, not because the small action is more impressive, but because it is more likely to be repeated. The goal in the beginning is not impact. The goal is repetition. The goal is to create the groove that will eventually allow the impactful action to happen automatically. Start so small that it would be embarrassing to fail. Write one sentence, walk one block, make one call, read one page, spend 5 minutes on the thing that matters. Not because 5 minutes will change your life this week, but because 5 minutes done consistently, compounded over months and years, will absolutely, mathematically, inevitably change your life. This is not inspiration, this is arithmetic. And here is what happens when you have been doing the 5 minutes. When you have been showing up for the small thing with consistent enough regularity that the neural groove is beginning to form, something shifts. Not because you decided to do more, but because doing more begins to feel natural. The habit itself creates momentum. The identity, I am someone who works on this every day, begins to solidify. And identity is the deepest driver of sustained behavior. Once you genuinely believe you are the kind of person who does the thing, the question changes. It is no longer whether you will do it, it is only how much today. And the answer to that question is no longer governed by motivation, which is volatile and unreliable. It is governed by identity, which is stable. This is the mathematics of small beginnings. One word, one day, 1%. The compound takes it from there. Chapter 5. What you are actually afraid of. We need to talk about fear, not the useful kind, not the fear that alerts you to genuine danger, the car that runs a red light, the strange person following you at night. That fear is your friend. That fear keeps you alive. I want to talk about the other kind. The vast, ambient, pervasive fear that has nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with the peculiar vulnerability of being a conscious being who is capable of imagining futures that have not yet arrived. The fear that shapes the trajectory of lives not through any single dramatic intervention, but through the daily cumulative weight of choices avoided, risks not taken, selves not expressed. Here is the most important thing I can tell you about this fear, and I want you to hear it clearly. You are afraid of the wrong things. I mean this specifically and literally. The things you are most afraid of, the things that keep you from starting, from reaching, from risking, are not actually the most dangerous things in your life. The most dangerous things in your life are the things you are not afraid of. Let me demonstrate. You are afraid of starting the business and failing. You are not afraid of spending the next 20 years in a job that is slowly killing your spirit. You are afraid of writing the book and having it received poorly. You are not afraid of dying with the book still inside you. You are afraid of going to the gym for the first time and looking like you do not belong there. You are not afraid of the slow deterioration of your health over the next decade if you do not change anything. The fear is pointed in exactly the wrong direction. You are afraid of the medicine and not afraid of the disease. You are afraid of the brief discomfort of the needle and not afraid of the chronic suffering of the untreated condition. This is what I call the fear inversion, and it is responsible for more human misery and unrealized potential than almost any other psychological phenomenon I know of. The fear inversion works like this. When we imagine doing the scary thing, the challenging thing, the thing that requires us to risk and expose and potentially fail, our brains run a very vivid, very detailed simulation of the worst-case scenario. We experience that scenario in something approaching real time, with real physiological responses. The heart rate increases, the stomach tightens, the brain registers danger and activates all the corresponding systems. When we imagine not doing the scary thing, staying put, choosing safety, choosing the known over the unknown, The brain does not run a comparably vivid simulation of the worst-case outcome of that choice. The worst case of staying put unfolds over years, sometimes decades. It is diffuse and slow and does not activate the same fear response because the brain has not been given a sufficiently concrete and immediate scenario to simulate, so we feel the full, immediate, physiological reality of the fear of action, and we feel almost nothing from the fear of inaction, and we make choices accordingly. This is not irrational. It is the predictable output of the brain's threat detection architecture, which was designed for immediate dangers, not chronic ones. But it means that unless we consciously correct for the asymmetry, we will systematically overweight short-term discomfort and underweight long-term cost every single time. The correction is to deliberately and viscerally imagine the worst-case outcome of not acting, not vaguely, not as an abstract acknowledgement that not acting has consequences, vividly, specifically, with the same concrete detail and physiological reality that your brain generates for the fear of action. What does your life actually look like in 10 years if you keep choosing the safe, small version of yourself? What does your body feel like? What does your work feel like? What do you think about in the quiet moments? What do you say to yourself in the private interior when no one can hear? Sit with that. Really sit with it. Now let me tell you what you are actually afraid of beneath all the specific fears, because the specific fears are symptoms. They are the surface expression of something deeper. What you are actually afraid of is yourself. Specifically, you are afraid of the version of yourself that might emerge if you gave your genuine nature room to exist. You are afraid of what it would mean to fully pursue what you care about, to live according to your actual values rather than the values you have been performing, to bring the full weight of who you genuinely are into the world without apology. Why would that be frightening? Because the fully expressed self is the vulnerable self. The person who has decided to live according to their genuine nature rather than the approved narrative is a person who has removed the protective layer of conformity. They are visible in a way that the default liver is not. They can be seen, and therefore they can be judged, and therefore they can be rejected. The fear of visibility is ancient and profound. It is the fear of the exposed position, the high ground where you can be seen from all directions, and it is one of the most powerful forces that keeps people living small, not because they are afraid of failure in the abstract, but because they are afraid of what full visibility costs. But here is what the fully hidden life costs. It costs you, not a part of you, the entire specific, unrepeatable, singular expression of consciousness that is you, the person who has been edited down to the approved version, who has hidden the challenging aspects and the strange aspects and the ambitious aspects and the hungry aspects, who has performed the acceptable self so consistently that the authentic self has been driven underground. That person has not avoided loss. They have chosen a different kind of loss. They have traded the risk of visible failure for the certainty of invisible self-erasure. Which loss is worse? Only you can answer that. But I want to make sure you are answering it honestly, with full awareness of what both options actually cost. The fear of visibility is not something you overcome once. It is not a battle you fight and win and then are done with. It is a daily negotiation between the part of you that wants to be seen and the part of you that wants to be safe. And the daily choice you make in that negotiation, consistently over time, determines the shape of your life. There is also what I call the fear of deserving. This is the fear that operates not through the anticipation of failure, but through the conviction that success itself would be somehow illegitimate. It is the fear that whispers, even if you got there, you would not belong there. Even if you built it, you would not deserve to keep it. Even if you became the person you are trying to become, you would eventually be found out as someone who was only pretending. This fear goes by the clinical name imposter syndrome when it operates in professional contexts, but it goes much deeper than professional contexts. It is a fundamental uncertainty about one's own right to inhabit the better life, to take up the larger space, to claim the extraordinary version of the story. It is rooted usually in a very early experience of being told, explicitly or implicitly, that a certain kind of person does not get certain kinds of things. It is rooted in the internalization of a ceiling that was placed over you by someone whose authority you had no choice but to accept at the time. The work of undoing this fear is not primarily intellectual. You cannot think your way out of a conviction that lives below thought. The work is experiential. You do the thing, you survive it. You do it again, you survive it again, and slowly in the accumulation of survivals, the evidence base shifts. The brain, which runs its threat assessments on data, begins to receive new data. The data says, I went out there and I was not destroyed. I took the risk and I did not lose everything. I expressed myself and I was not rejected in the ways I feared. And over time, the new data begins to overwrite the old narrative. This is how the fear of deserving dissolves, not through affirmations, not through convincing yourself intellectually that you deserve good things, but through the accumulated experience of going out and getting them and discovering that the world did not collapse and you did not disintegrate and the catastrophe you were sure was waiting did not arrive. You deserve to find out who you are when you are not afraid. That sentence is not empty encouragement. That sentence is a description of the most important experiment available to you. Find out. Chapter 6. The Architecture of a Chosen Life. Most people design nothing about their lives. They inherit a career path from the path of least resistance. They inherit a daily schedule from the demands of other people. They inherit a social circle from geography and circumstance. They inherit values from the culture they were raised in and never examine whether those values are actually theirs. They live inside a structure they did not design, which means they are living inside someone else's design, or more often, no design at all, just the accumulated default of every choice that was made by not making a choice. Building a chosen life is the work of an architect, not a tourist. A tourist moves through environments that other people built and makes the best of whatever they find. An architect begins with a vision and then deliberately, systematically, with skill and intention, constructs an environment that reflects and enables that vision. Most people are tourists in their own lives. This chapter is about learning to be the architect. The first principle of architecture is that you cannot build without knowing what you are building. This seems obvious, but in the context of life design, it is the step most commonly skipped. People know vaguely that they want to be happier, more successful, more fulfilled. But the goal of happiness is not a blueprint. The goal of success is not a foundation. Vague aspirational language does not have enough specific gravity to pull a life in any particular direction. The architect works from specifications. What exact dimensions? What materials? What relationship between spaces? What does this structure need to do, and for whom, and in what conditions? So the first question of life architecture is not what do you want, but what specifically, in concrete sensory detail, does the life you want to be living actually look like? Not in the abstract, in the specific. What time do you wake up in that life? What are the first things you do in the morning? What does your workspace look like? What kind of work are you doing, and what does it feel like in your body when you are doing it? Who are you spending your time with? What are your days made of, at the level of hours and minutes? What are you building, and what is it for? The more specific you can get, the more useful the specification becomes, because specificity creates direction, and direction is what a life without design is completely lacking. I want to give you a powerful framework for this. I call it the Ideal Day Exercise, and I want you to take it more seriously than the name suggests, because it is one of the most useful tools I know for converting vague aspiration into concrete direction. Describe in as much detail as you can manage the ideal ordinary day in the life you want to be living. Not the best day ever, not the vacation day or the highlight day, the ideal Tuesday. The day that, if you could have it consistently, would constitute a life well lived. The detail matters. What are you doing at 9 in the morning? What are you eating for lunch? What does it feel like to do your work? What has happened by 3 in the afternoon that makes you feel like the day has been worthwhile? What does the evening contain? Now compare that day in its specifics to the day you are actually living. The gap between those 2 days is not your failure, it is your blueprint. Every element of the ideal day that is absent from your actual day is a design problem waiting to be solved. And design problems have solutions. They require information and intention, and sometimes resources and sometimes time, but they are fundamentally solvable. They are not fate. They are not predetermined by your history or your circumstances or your personality. They are design problems. You can get to work on them. The second principle of life architecture is that the environment is not the background. The environment is the instruction. What I mean is this: the physical, social, and informational environments you inhabit are not neutral containers for your behavior. They are active shapers of it. Every element of your environment is constantly sending signals about what is normal, what is possible, what is expected, and what is rewarded. And your behavior follows those signals, often entirely below the level of conscious awareness. This means that designing your life is, to a significant degree, the work of designing your environments. If you want to write, your environment needs to make writing easy and distractions hard, not through willpower, through design. The phone in another room, the blank document already open, the writing time protected on the calendar with the same inviolability as a meeting with someone else. If you want to exercise, your environment needs to make exercise the path of least resistance. The gym bag by the door, the route from work that passes the gym, the workout clothes laid out the night before, the alarm set not to wake you up, but to remind you of who you said you were going to be. If you want to learn, your environment needs to make learning the default. Books visible, not buried. Podcast app opened before social media. Time for reading protected before the demands of the day colonize every available minute. None of this is complicated. All of it is intentional. The difference between the life that you want and the life that you have is, in very practical terms, often the difference between the environment you have designed and the environment you have inherited by default. Design your environment and you design your behavior. Design your behavior and you design your life. The third principle is what I call the principle of the anchoring commitment. Human willpower is not a reliable foundation for long-term behavior change. This is not a criticism, it is a fact of neurology. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function and deliberate decision-making, is a metabolically expensive piece of equipment. It exhausts. Every decision depletes it slightly. Every act of willpower draws down from a finite reservoir. By the evening, the reservoir is typically much lower than it was in the morning, which is why evening tends to be the time when people reach for comfort and abandon the choices they made with great conviction at sunrise. Willpower is a temporary bridge, not a foundation. The foundation is commitment architecture, the structures and systems and accountability mechanisms that remove the requirement for willpower by making the behavior automatic or socially enforced or structurally unavoidable. An anchoring commitment is a public or structural declaration that makes the new behavior more likely by creating real consequences for non-performance. It might be money paid to a cause you oppose if you do not complete your weekly goal. It might be a public statement to people you respect about what you are going to do and by when. It might be a system that automatically routes resources toward the thing you are committed to before willpower enters the picture. The anchoring commitment works not because it removes the difficulty of the behavior, but because it changes the cost calculation. Without an anchoring commitment, the cost of not doing the hard thing is low and immediate. You avoid discomfort. The cost of not doing the hard thing with an anchoring commitment is high and immediate. You face real consequences. The brain, which is a cost-benefit calculator at the most fundamental level, makes different decisions in these two environments. Build the anchoring commitment before you need it. Build it when motivation is high and willpower is full. Build it in the morning of your enthusiasm, not the evening of your exhaustion. Build it as the structure that will carry you through the days when you do not feel like carrying yourself. The architecture of a chosen life is not built in a single day. It is built the way all architecture is built, stone by stone, system by system, with a clear vision of the finished structure and the patience to work toward it across time. But it does not happen without the first stone. And the first stone is always laid today. Chapter 7. The discipline that doesn't feel like discipline. Everyone who has ever written about success has written about discipline. They have written about waking at 5, about the cold shower, about the 3-hour morning routine, about sacrifice and suffering, and the willingness to endure discomfort that lesser people will not endure. And all of this is true in a narrow sense. Discipline does matter. Consistency does matter. The willingness to do hard things is genuinely a differentiating factor in who achieves remarkable things and who does not. But the way discipline is typically described is deeply misleading, and that misleading description is responsible for an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering and failed attempts. Here is the misleading version. Discipline is about willpower. Discipline is about forcing yourself to do things you do not want to do through sheer force of character. The disciplined person hates the 6 a.m. alarm as much as anyone, but gets up anyway, purely because they are the kind of person who suffers what is necessary. Here is the truth about how discipline actually works in the lives of people who sustain it over long periods. They have built systems that make the hard thing feel normal. They have redesigned the environment so that the disciplined behavior is the default. They have practiced the behavior long enough that it has stopped requiring conscious effort. They have, most importantly, connected the behavior to something they genuinely care about, deeply enough that the behavior does not feel like suffering. It feels like expression. The discipline that lasts is not the discipline that feels like punishment. It is the discipline that feels like integrity. It is the discipline that feels like being the person you most want to be, repeatedly, across time. This is the distinction that most discussions of discipline miss entirely. The person who wakes at 5 because they are forcing themselves to wake at 5 will eventually stop waking at 5. The alarm will be silenced. The extra hour will be reclaimed by the mattress, because the behavior was sustained by willpower, and willpower is exhaustible. The person who wakes at 5 because they have built a morning practice that they genuinely love, because those early hours have become the sacred space where they do the work that matters most to them, because they have experienced enough mornings of extraordinary creative output in the quiet before the world starts demanding things of them that they now genuinely look forward to it. That person wakes at 5 naturally. The alarm becomes unnecessary. The behavior has been internalized. This is the tipping point of discipline. The moment when the externally imposed behavior becomes the internally chosen one. When the thing you made yourself do becomes the thing you want to do. When the discipline stops feeling like discipline because it has become identity. How do you reach that tipping point? You cannot get there without going through the early period when it still requires willpower. There is no way around the valley, but you can make the valley shorter and less painful by choosing the right behavior for the right reason. The right behavior is one that is meaningfully connected to something you genuinely care about, not something you think you should care about, not something that will impress people, something that resonates with the core of who you actually are. When you find that behavior, when the early rising is for the writing and the writing is for the story and the story is for something you need to say to the world, the valley becomes a transition rather than an ordeal. You can also make the valley shorter by engineering small wins. A small win is a piece of evidence that the new behavior is working. It is the feedback loop that tells the brain, this is worth continuing. The brain needs these signals, especially in the early period when the compound has not yet become visible. Without small wins, the brain receives no positive feedback for the new behavior and defaults back to the old behavior, which, however dysfunctional, at least has the comfort of familiarity. Engineer the small wins deliberately. Set the early goals so small that they are nearly impossible to miss. Not because you are not capable of more, but because the goal in the beginning is not maximum performance. The goal is maximum consistency, and consistency is easiest to achieve when the standard is achievable. 1 page a day is not impressive. Over a year it is a book. 1 mile a day is not impressive. Over a year it is 365 miles run, which is a different human body. $1 saved a day is not impressive. Over a year with careful investing, it is the beginning of a foundation. The discipline that does not feel like discipline is the discipline that has been made small enough to be sustainable, connected deeply enough to be meaningful, and practiced long enough to have become automatic. Here is something else about discipline that most people get wrong. Rest is not the opposite of discipline. Rest is discipline. The person who grinds without recovery is not demonstrating superior discipline. They are demonstrating a misunderstanding of how human performance actually works. The body and mind are not machines. They do not improve through continuous operation. They improve through cycles of stress and recovery. The stress applies the challenge. The recovery is when the adaptation happens. Sleep is when the memory consolidates. Rest is when the creative connections form. Downtime is when the subconscious, which is doing more of the interesting cognitive work than the conscious mind is typically given credit for, does its most productive processing. The truly disciplined life is not the life of unrelenting effort. It is the life of strategically applied effort punctuated by genuine recovery. The athlete who trains intelligently, alternating intensity with rest, progresses faster than the athlete who trains harder. The creator who protects their creative rest, who sleeps enough and plays enough and leaves room in their life for the kind of unfocused wandering that the mind needs, produces more interesting work than the creator who grinds themselves toward depletion. The discipline of rest is the discipline most neglected by people who are serious about building something. Take it seriously. The final thing I want to say about discipline in this chapter is about identity again, because identity is the engine underneath everything. The person who describes themselves as someone who exercises is not fighting the same battle as the person who describes themselves as someone who is trying to exercise. The first person is expressing their identity. The second person is managing their willpower. Identity always wins. So the most leverage point in building sustainable discipline is not the habit itself. It is the identity claim that the habit represents. Before the behavior becomes automatic, it must become a statement about who you are. I am a writer, not I am trying to write, not I am working on my writing. I am a writer. I am healthy, not I am trying to lose weight, not I am watching what I eat. I am healthy. I am someone who shows up for the hard things, not I am someone who is trying to be more disciplined. I am someone who shows up. The identity claim is not something you earn after the behavior is established. It is something you claim before, and the claiming is part of what makes the behavior possible. Who are you? Say it out loud, today. Before you have done the work that will seem to justify it, say the thing you are deciding to be. That is the beginning of the discipline that feels like freedom. Chapter 8. Burning the boats. In 1519, a Spanish conquistador named Hernán Cortés landed on the shores of what is now Mexico with 600 men to conquer a civilization that was, by most measures, vastly more powerful than his expedition. His men knew this. They could see it in the size of the empire, in the reports they had gathered, in the arithmetic of the confrontation they were walking toward. Some of them wanted to turn back. Some of them were making plans to turn back. Cortés burned the boats. He stood on the shore with his 600 men and he ordered the ships set on fire. Not scuttled, not sailed away, burned, visibly, completely, until there was nothing left on the water but smoke and the absence of retreat. The message was received. There was no longer a decision to be made about staying or going. The option of return had been physically eliminated. There was only forward. This story has become a cliché in motivational contexts, which is unfortunate because the underlying principle is one of the most profound and underutilized technologies for personal transformation that exists. The principle is this: When you eliminate the option of retreat, you eliminate the cognitive load of the question of retreat. When going back is not possible, all of your mental and emotional resources can be oriented toward going forward. Most people, when they decide to change their lives, do so while keeping every retreat option carefully preserved. They keep the old job while trying to build the new business. They stay in the relationship while testing whether they could live without it. They maintain the old habits while installing the new ones. They hedge every significant commitment with a silent reservation clause that says, if this gets too hard, I can always go back. And because the reservation clause is there, it gets invoked. Because the retreat option exists, it gets used. Because the boats are still in the harbor, they eventually get boarded. I am not telling you to make reckless, uninformed, financially catastrophic decisions. I am not saying burn the boats on a Tuesday after reading a book. The burning of the boats requires timing and intelligence and preparation. Cortés did not burn the boats on day one of the expedition. He burned them after he had assessed the situation, prepared his position, and determined that the commitment to full engagement was the only path to the outcome he required. But I am saying that there is a level of commitment that most people never reach because they never get off the psychological fence of hedge. There is a kind of clarity and resourcefulness and creative problem solving that becomes available only to people who have genuinely, fully, completely committed, who have burned their retreat options and faced forward with nothing behind them but smoke. This is because the human mind responds differently to closed choices than to open ones. When a choice is still open, the mind continues to allocate resources to evaluating it. Shall I or shall I not? Is this the right thing? What if I made a mistake? The closed choice does not receive this allocation. The closed choice is done. The mind turns its full capacity toward execution rather than deliberation. This is why the most productive periods of many creative people's lives have been periods of external constraint, when the option of doing something else was removed by circumstance, and the full creative capacity was channeled into the thing that remained. Burning the boats is the deliberate creation of that constraint. Let me be specific about what burning the boats can look like in a real life, not the dramatic cinematic version, but the practical, lived version. It might look like telling everyone you know that you are writing a book and that you will be done by a specific date. The boats that burn here are your reputation for follow-through and your permission to quietly abandon the project without anyone knowing. It might look like quitting the comfortable job that is paying your bills but destroying your soul, with enough financial runway to give the thing you actually want to do a real chance. The boats that burn are the safety net and the comfortable excuse that the job was never the right time. It might look like ending a relationship that is keeping you comfortable, but preventing you from becoming who you need to become. The boats that burn are the convenient companionship and the fear of solitude. It might look like signing up for the race, the performance, the exhibition, the pitch competition, the date, the conversation you have been postponing. The boats that burn are the ability to keep the thing theoretical. In every case, what is being burned is the option to stay safe inside the almost. And what is being gained is the full engagement of everything you have. The person who has fully committed generates different solutions than the person who is hedging, not because they are smarter or braver in some inherent way, but because their situation requires different solutions. Necessity is not just the mother of invention. It is the catalyst for the kind of resourceful, improvisational, all-in problem-solving that comfortable people never have access to because their comfort makes the extraordinary solution unnecessary. There is a conversation I want you to have with yourself in the aftermath of this chapter. The question is, what boat are you still keeping in the harbor? What is the option you are keeping open that is costing you the full commitment to the thing you actually want to be doing? What is the hedge that is preventing the all-in? What is the retreat path that your mind is partially allocated to maintaining, resources that could be directed forward if the path were closed? You do not have to burn it today, but name it, because the boat you are keeping in the harbor is the limit on your future. and it is a limit you put there yourself, which means you can remove it. Chapter 9. The people who will change everything. There is a calculation that happens in human neurological development that shapes more of your destiny than almost any other factor. It is not your IQ, it is not your education, it is not your early advantages or disadvantages. It is the specific people your brain spent the most time with during the formative periods of your development, and then throughout the continuing arc of your life. You have heard this idea in its popular form: you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. This aphorism is slightly simplistic but points at something real. Human beings are extraordinarily social learners. Our brains are wired at a fundamental level to synchronize with the people around us, to mirror their emotional states, to absorb their norms and standards and expectations, to calibrate our own sense of what is normal and possible according to what we observe in the people we are closest to. This is not metaphorical. Mirror neurons, the neural systems that fire when we observe someone else performing an action as if we were performing it ourselves, create a literal neurological link between your behavior and the behavior of people you spend time watching. Emotional contagion, the documented phenomenon by which mood states spread between people the way respiratory viruses spread, means that the emotional environment of the people around you is not their private experience. It is the emotional environment you inhabit. If the people around you are anxious, you will be more anxious. If they are ambitious, you will be more ambitious. If they believe that the kind of extraordinary life you are reaching for is what happens for other people, not people like you, that belief will find its way into your neural architecture whether you adopt it intellectually or not. Your social environment is the most powerful shaper of your behavior and therefore your outcomes that exists. This is both a sobering truth and a radical opportunity. Sobering because it means that the people you have been spending your time with may have been entirely unintentionally imposing a ceiling on what you have allowed yourself to reach for. This is not their fault, and it is not a reason to be angry at them. They were doing what social animals do. They were maintaining a shared consensus about reality, and you were absorbing it. Radical opportunity because it means that access to the right people, people who are living at the level you want to reach, people who take for granted the things you are still treating as impossible, people who can expand your sense of the normal, is one of the highest leverage moves available to you. Let me tell you about the effect of what I call an expanding reference group. When you are surrounded primarily by people who are operating at roughly your current level, your sense of what is normal, what is achievable, what requires exceptional circumstances is calibrated to that level. The things those people have achieved feel like the approximate ceiling of what is possible for someone in your situation. The things they have not attempted feel appropriately ambitious, out of reach for regular people. When you begin spending time with people who are operating significantly above that level, something important happens to your internal calibration. The things that felt ambitious begin to feel ordinary, not because they have become easier, but because you are now in the presence of people for whom those things are ordinary. The ceiling of the possible rises, the baseline of the expected shifts upward, and you rise with it. This is not about pretending to be what you are not. This is about giving your brain different data to calibrate against. The brain, remember, is a prediction machine. It uses the patterns of the past to predict the norms of the future. When the people around you represent a different pattern, your predictions shift accordingly. How do you access people who are operating at a higher level when you are not yet at that level yourself? This is the question most people get stuck on, because they imagine that access to extraordinary people requires some existing form of extraordinary status, that you need to already be at their level before they will give you time. This belief is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that can be demonstrated empirically by looking at how transformative relationships actually form. Extraordinary people, in virtually every field and context, are not nearly as inaccessible as most people assume. They are, in many cases, actively looking for people who carry genuine curiosity, genuine passion, genuine commitment to growth. because these qualities are rarer than achievement. There are plenty of people who have arrived at a certain level of external success. There are fewer people who bring the quality of genuine, engaged, non-transactional presence to a conversation. Be that person, not the person who approaches extraordinary people with an agenda, asking immediately for something. Not the person who tries to impress before listening. The person who comes with genuine curiosity, who asks the questions that go deeper than the surface, who listens with the kind of attention that most people never receive, who brings something of genuine value without immediately asking for something in return. Doors open, not always, not immediately, but with a consistency that surprises people who have been told that access is gated. There is also the underutilized technology of the curated environment, which is not about direct relationships at all. The books you read are conversations with people who are often decades or centuries ahead of you in wisdom and experience. The documentaries you watch, the podcasts you listen to, the writing you immerse yourself in, all of it is selecting the voices that are forming the ambient noise of your interior world. Most people select this ambient noise unconsciously, defaulting to whatever their algorithm serves them, which is optimized for engagement, not growth. The deliberate curation of intellectual and creative environment is one of the most practical forms of choosing your company. Who are you letting into your mind, not just in person, through every screen, every speaker, every page? Every piece of content you consume is a voice contributing to your internal calibration. Choose those voices the way you would choose the people you spend your days with, because the effect on your thinking, your standards, your sense of what is possible is not so different. The relationships that will change everything are not always the ones that will be most comfortable. Growth-oriented relationships often carry the productive friction of being challenged, of having your assumptions questioned, of being held to a higher standard than the one you are currently meeting. Be careful not to mistake comfort for value in a relationship. Some of the most valuable relationships in the history of human development have been deeply uncomfortable. The mentor who tells you truths you do not want to hear, the peer who refuses to validate your excuses, the person who loves you enough to hold you accountable to who you say you are going to be. These relationships are hard to find and easy to flee. Seek them anyway, because the people who will change everything are the people who will not let you stay the same. Chapter 10. The Cost of Comfort. Comfort is the most expensive thing most people will ever consume. Not in dollars, in years, in unlived potential. In the specific and irreplaceable cost of a human life lived inside the perimeter of safety rather than the frontier of possibility. Let me be precise about what I mean by comfort in this context, because comfort in the ordinary sense of the word, physical ease, pleasurable experience, restful conditions, is not what I am talking about and is not what I am asking you to sacrifice. The comfort I am talking about is the psychological variety. It is the comfort of the known, the comfort of the predictable, the comfort of the situation where you already know who you are and what you can do and how things work because you have been here before. It is the comfort of the zone where no one will ask more of you than you are certain you can deliver, where failure is not a real possibility because the bar has been set at the level of guaranteed success. This comfort is not comfort at all. It is stagnation dressed in warm clothing. Here is the problem with the comfort zone that its name does not capture. The comfort zone is not static. It does not hold its size if you stay inside it. It shrinks. Every time you choose the comfortable option over the challenging one, the zone contracts slightly. Every time you avoid the situation that would have required you to grow, the boundary of what feels comfortable draws in. Every time you choose safety over stretch, the capacity for stretch diminishes. This is why people who have lived conservatively for a long time often find themselves afraid of things that are not objectively frightening. The zone has contracted so far that ordinary risks now feel existential. A difficult conversation, a new environment, an unfamiliar challenge. Things that would be simply part of normal navigation for someone who has been regularly pushing their edges become mountain-sized obstacles for someone whose world has been shrinking. And here is the other side of the equation, the discomfort zone. The frontier of what you do not yet know you can do does not stay the same size either. Every time you push into it, it expands. Every time you do the hard thing, the scary thing, the thing you were not sure you could manage, the perimeter of your possible self extends. What was frightening becomes familiar. What was unknown becomes known. What was beyond your capacity becomes evidence of your capacity. This is the paradox of the comfort zone. The only way to keep it comfortable is to keep expanding it. The only way to stay safe inside it is to keep pushing against its edges. The person who never challenges themselves is not safe. They are just losing ground more slowly, inside a zone that is contracting so gradually they cannot see the walls moving. The cost of comfort is not paid dramatically. It is not a single catastrophic loss. It is the slow taxation of a life that is spending its years in the service of the familiar instead of the possible. It is the bill that arrives, not in a single statement, but in the quiet recognition, sometimes at midlife, sometimes later, that so much of what was possible has been traded for so little. Let me tell you about the specific texture of that recognition, because I want you to understand what the fully accumulated cost of comfort looks like, not in the abstract, but in the lived human experience of it. It looks like the successful career that feels hollow. The person looked, from outside, like they built something impressive. They climbed the ladder that was put in front of them, achieved the titles they were told to aim for, earned the salary that was the metric they were given, and one morning they sat in their car in the parking garage before going into the office and could not remember why any of it mattered. Not because it was bad, because it was never theirs, because every choice had been made in the direction of what was approved and expected, and not once had the deeper question been asked, but is this actually what I am for? It looks like the relationship that has survived but not thrived. Two people who chose each other in the early rush of something real, and then slowly, through years of incremental comfort, stopped doing the hard work that real intimacy requires, stopped having the conversations that go to the depth of what is true, stopped growing, individually and together, because growth requires the risk of change, and change threatens the comfortable equilibrium they have built. A relationship that is functional and safe, and completely deprived of the passionate, truthful, fully alive quality that was what they wanted in the first place. It looks like the unrealized creative work. The music unplayed, the business unbuilt, the book unwritten, the art not made. All the living proof of a person's interior world that was kept inside because the act of bringing it out would have required the willingness to be seen, and being seen is uncomfortable, and comfort was the primary operating value. All of this is the cost of comfort. And here is what makes it so tragic. The person who paid this cost did not enjoy the comfort they purchased. That is the cruelest irony. The comfort zone does not feel comfortable to live in, not really, not at the level of genuine peace. It feels to the honest interior like the specific anxiety of someone who knows they are living below their own potential, like the low-grade unhappiness of someone who is surviving but not alive, like the existential restlessness of a being who was built for more and is being given less. The comfort zone is uncomfortable for the person inside it, which means the calculation is not, as it is often framed, comfort now versus discomfort later. It is discomfort now versus different, more honest, more grinding discomfort now, plus the possibility of the fully alive version of yourself on the other side. The discomfort of growth is productive. It is the discomfort of a muscle being challenged, the useful pain that signals adaptation. The discomfort of stagnation is sterile. It is the restless, purposeless ache of a life not fully lived. You will be uncomfortable either way. Choose the discomfort that leads somewhere and understand, clearly and completely, what the comfort you are guarding is actually costing you, because nothing in your life is free. The comfort zone charges the highest rate of all. Chapter 11. The Philosophy of the Long Game. Here is a thought experiment. Imagine two people. The first person makes choices primarily based on how they will feel in the next 24 hours. The second person makes choices primarily based on how they will feel in 20 years. What are the daily lives of these two people likely to look like? The first person sleeps in when the alarm goes off for the early workout. The second gets up. The first eats the thing that tastes best in the moment. The second eats the thing that serves the long-term health. The first avoids the hard conversation because today it feels easier. The second has it because they know that unspoken things compound into distance the way that interest compounds into debt. The first works on what is urgent. The second works on what is important. The difference between these two lives is not a difference in effort. Both people are equally hard-working. The difference is in the time horizon of their decision-making. The philosophy of the long game is the single most important strategic shift available to someone who wants to build a meaningful life. Not because the long game ignores the present, but because it makes different choices in the present based on a clear understanding of how the present connects to the future. Every present choice is a vote for a future self, and the long game player casts their votes deliberately. Let me introduce you to a concept I call temporal discounting, which is one of the most important psychological phenomena for understanding why people fail to do what they know they should do. Temporal discounting is the brain's tendency to value a reward less the further it is in the future. $100 now is worth more to the brain than $1,000 in 10 years, even when the rational math is obvious. This is not stupidity. It is deeply embedded evolutionary programming that was adaptive in an environment where the future was genuinely uncertain and the present was what determined survival. But temporal discounting is devastating for the building of a meaningful life, because virtually everything that matters about a meaningful life is a long-term investment: education, health, relationships, skills, creative work, financial security. None of it pays off immediately. All of it requires the consistent, sustained investment of present effort for returns that arrive in the future. The person operating under high temporal discounting will systematically underinvest in all of these things, not because they do not know they matter, but because the present cost is vivid and real, and the future benefit is abstract and distant, and the brain weights them accordingly. The correction for temporal discounting is not willpower, it is vision. Specifically, it is the capacity to make the future vivid, to be able to imagine the future self with enough sensory and emotional richness that it generates real feeling in the present, the way the present generates real feeling. When the future self feels real, temporal discounting is reduced. The investment in the future begins to feel as motivating as the consumption of the present. This is why vision work, the practice of vividly imagining the life you want to be living in 5 or 10 or 20 years, is not mere positive thinking. It is a precision tool for overriding temporal discounting. It is a way of making the future present enough to compete with the present's pull. The long game also requires a particular relationship with failure that is different from how failure is typically experienced. In the short game, a failure is a setback. It is negative evidence about your capability and your direction. It is a cost to be minimized and, if possible, avoided. In the long game, a failure is data. It is information about what does not work, delivered at a relatively low cost compared to the cost of not knowing. It is a correction mechanism that allows the trajectory to be adjusted before the error compounds. It is, in many cases, the most efficient possible path through the learning curve. The long game player does not seek failure, but they are not devastated by it. They are interested in it. They approach the failed attempt the way a scientist approaches an unexpected experimental result, with genuine curiosity about what it reveals and what it suggests for the next iteration. This is not a personality trait. It is a perspective that can be cultivated, and the cultivation of it is one of the most practically useful things you can do for the trajectory of your life. Here is a practice that embodies the philosophy of the long game. I call it the 10-year letter. Write a letter to the person you want to be in 10 years, not the person you currently are, projected forward with minor improvements. the person you most genuinely want to become, the one living the life that the best version of your present self has been imagining. Write to that person with the warmth and intimacy you would use for someone you love deeply. Tell them what you are doing today that is building toward who they are. Tell them what you are letting go of that was preventing the journey. Tell them what you understand about the path that you want to carry with you through the decade ahead. Tell them that you will not stop. Now read the letter back to yourself as if you are that person, reading backward to your present self. What does that future person want you to know right now, today, about what matters? What does that person, looking back over the 10 years of work and growth and occasional failure that built them, wish they could tell you about how to spend the days ahead? That letter, written honestly and read with genuine attention, is one of the most powerful navigational tools I know for aligning present choices with long-term direction. The long game is not about deferring happiness to the future. It is about understanding that the deepest happiness, the kind that is not dependent on external circumstances and not subject to the volatility of mood, is the happiness of a life in alignment. A life where who you are and what you do and what you are building are all pointing in the same direction. A life where the present and the future are in conversation rather than conflict. Play the long game not because the short game does not matter, but because the long game is the only game in which the score at the end reflects the life you actually wanted to live. Chapter 12. When everything falls apart. Everything will fall apart at some point. Not might, will. If you are engaged in any genuine pursuit of anything that matters, the path will at some point include a period of collapse. The business will fail or come close to failing. The relationship will reach a point of real crisis. The health will break down. The creative project will hit a wall so insurmountable that walking away feels like the only sane option. The plan that seemed solid will prove to have been built on assumptions that were wrong. This is not a pessimistic statement. It is a realistic one, and the preparation for it, the psychological and practical readiness for the moment when everything falls apart, is one of the most important things you can build in the good times. Because the difference between people who build remarkable lives and people who do not is not that the first group never experiences collapse. It is that they have a different relationship with collapse when it arrives. I want to tell you about the Japanese concept of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. In kintsugi, when a piece of ceramic breaks, the pieces are not discarded. They are not invisibly repaired, glued together so that the break is hidden. They are rejoined with lacquer mixed with gold or silver so that the break becomes visible, golden, even more beautiful than the original unbroken form. The philosophy underlying kintsugi is that the break is not a flaw to be hidden. It is part of the history of the object. The repair makes the object stronger at the breakpoint than it was before. The scar becomes the most interesting part of the story. This is what I want you to take into the moments of collapse. The moment when everything falls apart is not an interruption to your story. It is one of the most important chapters. How you move through it, what you learn from it, what you build in its aftermath, is often the most revealing and defining aspect of the entire arc. The people I have known who have built the most meaningful lives are, almost universally, people who have been broken by something and rebuilt themselves through it. Not people who escaped hardship, but people who went through it with enough consciousness and enough commitment to let it change them in the ways it needed to change them. Collapse does several things that comfort cannot. Collapse clarifies. When things fall apart, the non-essential things fall away first. The parts of your life that were there for approval, for comfort, for the maintenance of appearance, those things reveal themselves as non-structural. And what remains, the things that survive the collapse, the things that you return to when everything else is stripped away, those are the things that are actually fundamental to who you are. Collapse shows you your real foundation. Collapse builds capacity, not metaphorically, literally. The research on post-traumatic growth, the well-documented psychological phenomenon in which people emerge from severe adversity with increased emotional resilience, deeper relational capacity, and greater clarity of purpose, demonstrates that the human psyche is not simply damaged by difficulty. It is, under the right conditions, strengthened by it. The key conditions are meaning-making, the ability to find or create some purpose or learning within the adversity, and a sufficient support structure, people and practices that hold you through the process. Neither of those conditions is automatically present. Both of them can be cultivated. Collapse creates empathy. The person who has not been broken cannot fully inhabit the experience of others who are breaking. The person who has lost something real knows what loss feels like in the body, in the hours of the night, in the particular quality of a morning, when you wake up and the world has changed and you have not yet adjusted to the new shape of it. This knowing, held consciously and with compassion, is the foundation of the kind of human presence that genuinely helps other people. The most effective helpers in every domain are people who have been somewhere difficult and navigated through it. Now let me give you the practical philosophy for the moment of collapse itself. When things fall apart, the instinct is either to fix immediately or to freeze. Neither is usually the right response in the first days of a significant collapse. Fixing too quickly, before you understand what actually happened and why, often means reassembling the thing that broke in the same configuration that led to the break. Freezing means allowing the collapse to become a permanent state by not eventually choosing to engage with it. The middle path is to witness, to bring a quality of clear, compassionate, honest attention to what has happened, what you have lost, what is genuinely gone and what might be rebuilt, what the collapse is revealing about where you were that you may need to acknowledge fully before you can move forward intelligently. This is not passive. Witnessing with genuine attention is one of the most demanding things humans do. It requires sitting with the discomfort of not yet knowing, with the ambiguity of the middle space between what was and what will be, without rushing to resolution. But the clarity that comes from genuine witnessing is the foundation of genuine rebuilding. And the rebuilding, when it comes, can be better than what was there before. Because the gold in the joints of kintsugi is not a consolation, it is an improvement. Your cracks can be your gold. The question, in the aftermath of every collapse, is not what have I lost? It is what have I learned that I could not have learned any other way, and what am I going to build now that I know what I know? That question is not asked from a place of denial or forced positivity. It is asked from the deepest possible commitment to the thing that this book is entirely about. The commitment to keep going, to not let the collapse be the last word, to treat the broken state not as the end, but as the material. Day one can begin the morning after everything has fallen apart. In fact, that is often when it begins most honestly, most deeply, most permanently. Chapter 13. The last reason. We are almost at the end. I want to use this second to last chapter to do something that books like this rarely do. I want to challenge you on the reasons you have given yourself for not starting. Not to dismiss them, they are real. Most of them are real. The time constraint is real. The financial constraint is real. The family obligation is real. The imperfect circumstances are real. I am not asking you to pretend that the obstacles do not exist. I am asking you to take a closer look at the last reason, the one that is never stated, the one that lives behind all the stated ones, because there are real obstacles, and then there is the last reason, and the last reason is the one that operates even when the real obstacles have been removed. I have seen this over and over. The person who says, "If I had more money, I would start," and then they have more money and they still have not started. The person who says, "When the kids are older," and then the kids are older and there is a new reason. The person who says, "When I know enough," and they study and study and the knowing is never quite enough, because the reasons were never the real reason. The last reason is almost always the same for almost everyone. The last reason is the fear that when you finally fully give yourself to the thing that matters most to you, with nothing held back, nothing hedged, with every retreat burned and every excuse exhausted, you might discover that it was not enough, that you tried your very best, your absolute maximum, and the result was still not what you were hoping for. And that is the fear that lives behind all the other fears. Because as long as you have not tried your best, you can preserve the story that your best would have been sufficient. As long as the conditions were not quite right, as long as you were holding something in reserve, as long as there was an excuse, you can tell yourself that the real version of you, the fully committed version, the one operating without obstacles and with adequate time and resources and support, that version would have made it. It is a story that costs you everything to maintain, because you will not live forever. And at some point, the conditions will never have been quite right. And at some point, you will have to reckon with the fact that the fully committed version of you was always available, always there, always waiting to be called upon, and was repeatedly deferred in favor of the waiting self. The last reason keeps you from the only life that is actually available, not the ideal life with ideal conditions. This life, the one with the constraints and the imperfect circumstances and the competing obligations and the incomplete information, this exact life, lived with the full, unhedged, nothing in reserve commitment of the person you most want to be. This is what I want you to be honest about as we reach the final chapter. What is the last reason? Not the first one you give, the last one. The one that would still be standing if all the practical obstacles were cleared. Name it, because unnamed it is your jailer. Named, it is just a fear, which means it is manageable, which means it is not a life sentence unless you decide it is. The last reason can be held, it can be examined, it can be carried alongside you as you move forward, rather than standing in front of you as a wall. You do not have to wait until the fear is gone. You go with the fear. You take it by the hand, this last reason you have been protecting yourself with, and you bring it along as you step forward anyway. That step, taken with the fear fully present and fully acknowledged, and not given the final authority over your life, is the bravest thing a person can do. It is also the most ordinary thing in the world. Every person who has ever done anything that mattered took that step, not in the absence of the last reason, but in spite of it. With the fear as a companion, not a commander, take the step. The last chapter is waiting for you on the other side of it. Chapter 14. Day 1. This is the last chapter, and I am not going to give you a summary. I am not going to review the chapters that came before, or repeat their wisdom in condensed form. If you have been here, you have heard them. If something in them landed, it landed. What I am going to give you is this. The morning. Somewhere while you have been reading this book, the world has continued to move. The sun has made its arcs. The seasons have made their turns. The cells in your body have been replaced and renewed. The universe has continued its vast, indifferent, breathtaking expansion into the infinite darkness of itself. And in the middle of all of this, you have been here, in this one irreplaceable arrangement of matter and consciousness and history that is you, trying to figure out how to use the time that is given. Here is what I know about that time. It is enough, not in the sense that it is unlimited, not in the sense that you have all the time you could want, but in the sense that is the only sense that matters. There is enough time to begin today. There is enough time, starting now, to change the direction of the story, not to undo the past, not to reclaim the years that have been spent in the waiting room, but to begin the part that is still ahead, which is all the part that is left, the only part that is available to anyone. I want to go back to David, the man with the green notebook, but I want to tell the story differently, not as it happened, but as it could have happened, on a different version of the timeline. On this version, David is sitting at his desk on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The notebook is in front of him. The usual feeling is there, the familiar mix of desire and avoidance and that specific variety of exhaustion that comes not from working, but from not working, from carrying the weight of the unlived thing. And something shifts. It is not a dramatic shift. There is no thunderclap, no vision, no arrival of some long-awaited feeling of readiness. There is just a moment in which David reaches across the desk and opens the notebook to the first page and picks up a pen and writes one sentence, not the perfect sentence, not the opening sentence of the novel he has been imagining for 6 years, not a sentence he is particularly proud of. Just a sentence, just words on the previously white and waiting page, and then another sentence, and the page is no longer empty. And the next day he sits down again, not because the world has changed or the circumstances have improved or the feeling of readiness has arrived, but because yesterday he wrote 2 sentences and today he will write 2 more. And the compound has begun, and the notebook is no longer buried. That is the version of David I want you to hold in your mind as you finish this book, not the version whose notebook was buried with him. The version who opened it on a Tuesday afternoon in March and wrote the first 2 sentences of a different story. Now I want to tell you something about day 1. Day 1 is not a day you wait for, it is a day you declare. It does not have a particular quality that distinguishes it from the day before or the day after. The sun does not rise differently on day 1. The world does not reorganize itself around the fact of your beginning. The significance of day 1 is entirely internal. It is entirely a matter of what you decide in the quiet, unremarkable, completely ordinary geography of an average moment. And because it is entirely internal, it can happen now, not in the moment when you feel most ready, not in the morning of the ideal week, not when the last obstacle has cleared. Now, in this exact moment, with exactly what you have, in exactly the circumstances you are in, the decision to begin is not made in conditions. It is made against them. Every person who has ever begun anything remarkable began in circumstances that were to some degree suboptimal. The conditions were not right. The timing was not perfect. The readiness was not complete. They began anyway, and the beginning itself created conditions that would not have existed without it. The beginning is the prerequisite for everything that comes after it, which means nothing that matters comes without the beginning, which means nothing is as important as the beginning. There is a particular kind of courage that gets talked about least in our culture, not the courage of the battlefield or the emergency room or the public declaration, the quiet courage of the daily return, the courage that wakes up the morning after the failed attempt and goes again, the courage that opens the notebook after 6 days of not opening it, the courage that sends the application, starts the conversation, puts the first word on the page, makes the first call, takes the first step for the 27th time after 26 starts that did not stick. This courage does not look like much from the outside. It does not have the drama that gets celebrated, but it is the courage that actually changes lives, because changing a life is not a single dramatic act. It is the accumulation of undramatic daily choices made over a long enough time that the compound becomes undeniable. This is what I want you to take from this book. Not an insight, not a framework, not a set of techniques. The decision, the clear, fully conscious, irreversible decision to stop being the passenger in your own life and become the driver. To stop waiting for one day and make today day 1, to stop protecting yourself from the possibility of failure and give yourself to the possibility of the fully lived life, to stop living in the passive voice, things happening to me, and start living in the active, I am building this. That decision, made genuinely, changes everything. Not all at once, not dramatically, but the way dawn changes the dark, the way the tide changes the shore. Gradually, incrementally, and then, if you stay with it long enough, completely. There is a human being who is available to you that you have not yet met. The version of you that ran out of excuses, the version that stopped waiting for the right time and started making this time right. The version that is 30% braver and 50% more honest and 100% more alive. The version that looks back on today, on this exact moment, and says, that was it. That was the day I stopped letting one day steal my life. That person is not a fantasy. They are not the product of ideal circumstances you do not have. They are not reserved for people who started earlier or had more advantages or were built differently. They are the you that begins today. They are you right now, in this moment. As this book draws to a close and the blank page opens, I have one last thing to say. Thank you, not for reading this book, for being the kind of person who is still asking the question. Because people stop asking the question when they have given up. The fact that you picked up this book, that you have stayed with it to its final words, means the question is still alive in you. The hunger is still there. The possibility has not been fully surrendered. Hold that, protect it, feed it, and then step into the morning of your one life and write the sentence that changes everything. Not tomorrow, now. Day 1. The epilogue. A letter to the you who is still hesitating. I know you are still standing at the edge. I know that even after everything in this book, there is a part of you that is reading these words and thinking, yes, but in my case, in my specific situation, with my specific history and my specific obstacles and my specific version of the last reason, I am writing this letter to that part of you, not to argue with it. I have already made the arguments. You have heard them. If they were going to change your mind through reasoning alone, they already would have. I am writing to acknowledge you. The hesitation is real. The fear is real. The history that created the hesitation and the fear is real. I am not asking you to pretend it is not. What I am asking is for you to stand at the edge with all of it present, every fear and every reason and every memory of every time before that things did not work out the way you hoped, and to ask yourself one final question. Is the story you have been telling yourself about who you are and what is possible for you, is it actually true? Or is it the most plausible story you could construct from the evidence you had available at the time you constructed it? Because the evidence has changed, you have lived more, you have learned more. You are carrying something now, something in the reading of this book and in the questions it has asked you to sit with, and in the recognition that has landed in the quiet moments between chapters, that you were not carrying when the old story was written. You are not the same person who first decided to wait for one day. You have changed. Even in the reading of this, even in the willingness to ask the questions, even in the discomfort you felt when certain chapters hit too close. The old story does not fit the new person. Write a new one, not a perfect one, not the final version, just the next version. The one that is true for who you are today, in this moment, after everything you have learned and lost and built and broken and rebuilt and questioned. Write the story where today is day 1, and then live it. That is all. That is everything. The page is open. The pen is in your hand. Begin.